Well, good morning. It's good to be here with you. I was down in Madison, just got back this morning. We'll be going back to grab the family this afternoon. But that's just kind of how it works when you want to see family. Just like, we're going to go down, I'll come back up for church, we'll go back down. And then we'll go for Thanksgiving. So if the girls didn't have school Monday and Tuesday, they would just stay down there. Darn school, tell ya. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I just kind of felt like it was really life-giving last week to combine services and see all you wonderful faces together in one space. It doesn't happen very often. And because of that, we've gotten a lot of good feedback when we've done combined services. So we're going to do another one on the last Sunday of December. So that's the Sunday after Christmas. And then we're going to do another one on the 5th Sunday of January, which will be the 30th. So that's exciting. It's so nice to have everybody in the same space every once in a while, and just to remind each other, me included, that we're one church and not two separate ones. So last week, Molly talked about God's household. She talked about how Jesus' mission was to make Jews and Gentiles, or really Jews and everyone else in the world, one new creation, not Jews and Gentiles in the same space coexisting and tolerating each other, but in the same space as one creation, one whole instead of two different groups. And this week I'm going to talk about monuments. I'm going to talk about monuments, the markers we build to remember things in our lives. And it's always way deeper than the monument itself. With the markers we use to put down those moments in history, whether it's our personal history or collective history. And we mark these moments, and it's helping us, sometimes physically, with the structure that represents this thing, something bigger. And other times it comes in the form of stories handed down from one generation to the next. And we tend to build our own monuments. And here's one right here that Christine was sharing with me. This is a cairn, which is a pile of stones. And this is a monument that you actually see throughout nature. Lots of people will set these up to either commemorate a special space where something happened, or it's also a guide. It's a guide. Hey, this is the right path. This is the path where you need to be. This is the ancient path that people take. Have taken all over the years. And it represents that. So not only do monuments help us remember something important, but monuments can also guide us when we get lost. And I think that's pretty cool how monuments do that. And that's what Christine was sharing with me. And I think they can be like a reference point to reorient our steps at times. So I want to turn to the biblical text. In the Old Testament, we're going to turn to Joshua, but I want to give a slight bit of context, like a 15-second elevator context. So the Israelites had been on a 40-year quest to find the promised land. 40 stinking years in the desert. They fled Egypt. They crossed through the Red Sea on dry land, if you'll remember. And then they're now entering the promised land of Canaan. So this is important. So let's read this. And I actually didn't put it on the screens. So there are Bibles in the pews now, which is really awesome. So this says memorials to the Jordan crossing. This is Joshua chapter 4, verse 1 through 7. It says this: when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, and also, by the way, this is cool because there's a parallel between the Exodus from Egypt, where they crossed the Red Sea on dry land, and then this moment in history later, 40 years later, where they're going to cross the Jordan on dry land. So let's read more of this. So when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them to take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at a place where you will camp tonight. So the land was dry in the Jordan River, the most important river to these people for centuries and centuries and millennia. This river was dry, so they could go out and pull stones from it and create a monument. Now, why did they create a monument? So Joshua called them together, and he said, go in the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder, 12 stones in all. one for each of the 12 tribes. And I love this. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. So I love that question. What do these stones mean? What do these stones mean? We're constantly asking that question. What's that tattoo mean? What's that plaque in the hallway? What's that mural mean in the garden? When your children ask those questions, tell them. It's a symbol of love and commitment. That's what I think a lot about memorials, about monuments. And I think back, this is Thanksgiving week coming up, and I think back to when my grandma lived with us as a child, and I would anticipate Thanksgiving because her best, greatest gift of all our gifts was to bake and cook. And so I would smell the homemade noodles that she had across her whole countertop drying, and I would smell the pies that are cooking up, and we'd have 35, 40 people at our house because she had a lot of grandkids. And it was just the most incredible experience. Pumpkin pie, pecan pie, and my favorite pie of all time, black raspberry cream pie, which is a hard thing to get. Not just blackberry cream pie, black raspberry cream pie. So that's important to know. So I anticipated this, and I remember that day I knew I had to get a hold of that pie before everybody else did, and I did. And I ate 6 pieces of pie on Thanksgiving Day. And I'm not telling you that. I'm being vulnerable with y'all. I'm just being honest. I'm not proud of that moment. And the next day I had basketball practice. This was in high school. And the aftermath of that experience, it just wasn't a good decision at all. But yeah, so, basketball practice right after that, and gut drills is what we called them, running across it was bad news. But what this did for me, this whole story is a monument. It's a monument to my grandma. And my sister did even better. My older sister, her name's Angie, she actually took these recipes that my grandma had made, and she sat down with my grandma before she passed, and she learned them all. And so every Thanksgiving, she makes these pies, and she cooks those noodles. She does all of that. It's a monument. It's a story passed down from one generation to the next, the story of love and commitment. And we all have those stories. They're what we call traditions. They turn into traditions. And I love what that can mean. It's a way to remember others. It's a way to remember how God has been faithful to us. We ask the question, what does this stone mean? And as I was saying earlier, when I think of monuments, when I think of memorials, I think of the garden room. I think of that mural. I think of plaques in the hallways. What do those mean? They always mean something much deeper than we realize. So what have you memorialized, if you think about it? What are the things in your life you've memorialized? What are your traditions? What are the things you do that represent love, that represent commitment to family, to friends, to getting through stuff together? Sometimes people ask me, why the tattoo? Why did you put permanent ink on your arm? And I love that question, because what do these stones mean? Well, this to me means going to the redwood forest in California and realizing that these enormous pieces of creation, these physical structures that are really monuments to the glory of God, are right there, resizing me every time I look at them. And someone said this week, and I thought it was so good, it makes me feel small in a good way, like I'm being taken care of. It's like, that's so good. I think that's what I see in creation too. Like when you go to the bay, when you go to Lake Michigan, when you go and see just this magnificent structures, waterfalls, these things, they resize you. They make you feel small maybe, like it does me. And then you remember that you're taken care of. I remember that I'm going to be okay. There's just something incredibly resizing about that. So what have you memorialized in your life? When someone asks, what do these stones mean? Do you have an answer? Of course you do. Of course you do. Because it's so deep, it's so personal, it's so meaningful. Maybe you go up north and that's your tradition. maybe whatever direction. Maybe go to Door County. Maybe it's how you do Thanksgiving. Maybe it's how you do Christmas. Maybe it's the simple things you do every morning with your kids or your grandkids, or, what do these stones mean? And I know that we are actually living monuments ourselves. We're living stones of remembrance. And why do I say that? Because we get to share stories. We get to share stories. And when our kids ask, what do these stones mean? We can tell them. They remind us that we're going to be okay because God's with us. So what are your stones? 1 Peter 2:5 says, you are living stones that God is building into God's spiritual house. You are God's ministers. We are the ones telling the stories. We are the ones ministering to each other, and it perfectly falls in line with the congregational way of living. That we are all ministers. We're all telling stories. We're all building monuments. What kind of monuments are you going to build? I was going to talk in more depth about monuments that build up the stories of love and commitment, and then on the contrasting side, the monuments that build up stories of fear and shame. And I don't have time to do that, and I just didn't feel like the Spirit was kind of leading me that way. But think about that too. What monuments are you building that are built on solid ground, and what monuments are you building that maybe are built on sand? When we minister to each other as living stones, as living monuments, we represent these stories of love and commitment, these stories that will guide us when we are lost, these stories that will guide our children when they don't know where to go, when they're wondering where their identity is. These stories remind us that something deeper is always happening, something more important than we can articulate adequately. A man named Joseph Joubert once said, monuments are the grappling irons that bind one generation to another. It's like, that is just so good. Monuments are the grappling irons that bind one generation, maybe the older with the younger. Maybe 3 generations are bound together with these stories. I know my family has that. Our traditions of Thanksgiving actually cross over 4 generations. So monuments are the grappling irons that bind one generation to another. I love that so much. So my question for us is, if we are living, walking, breathing stories, if we are monuments, what are we memorializing? What do your stones mean? Are we memorializing stories of love and commitment? What are we binding to the next generation? What are we binding with the generation that went before us? And that's why things like the mural are important. We can look at that and say, I was painted in the 1970s, so it's not important anymore. Of course it's important, because it shows this story of love and persistence and commitment, and really sometimes complete tragedy, and God rebuilding and provision, and sad moments, and valleys and mountaintops. And it just simply reminds us that we're going to be okay. Yeah, we're going to be okay. So let's pray together. God, thank you so much that you have built into us this strong, innate desire to share stories. And I pray that when we build our monuments, as we continue to build our monuments, we'll be prepared to tell our children what these stones mean. God, I thank you for the legacy you've built in this place. I thank you for the legacies of the families that make it up, that make up this church body. And I pray that our legacy will be to continue to explore, to continue to go forward. I pray that our legacy will be to welcome people in, to make space for the guest. God, thank you that we are going to be okay because of you and your provision and your greatness and what you do and how you remind us. It's all to your glory and for the love of the world. In your heavenly name, amen.